Imagine waking up on like a random Tuesday morning. You grab your phone, you're still half asleep, and you open your email, and nothing loads.
Oh, man. The worst feeling.
Right. So you think, okay, bad connection. You check your internal company dashboard. Blank.
Yeah.
A cold sweat starts to form. Because you realize that your entire company, I mean, every line of code, every customer database, every single piece of intellectual property you and your co-founders have built over the last 3 years, it's completely locked down.
And then the realization hits of who actually did it.
Exactly. You realize who locked it. It wasn't, a Russian hacking syndicate or some ransomware attack. It was the mid-level engineer you fired yesterday afternoon.
Yep.
You told him to clear out his desk, but in the awkward, emotional mess of the firing, you forgot to immediately revoke his administrative server access.
It's just such an easy mistake to make when emotions are high.
Right. And now this guy is literally holding your entire startup hostage.
It's a terrifying reality.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is that specific scenario isn't a hypothetical.
No, it's not.
That actually happened to a startup in the Y Combinator network. It is like the absolute nightmare scenario of failing to understand the raw mechanics of scaling human capital.
Spot on. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are speaking directly to you, the listener. Whether you are, managing a team of 3 people, or maybe you're navigating the corporate politics of a massive Fortune 500 company.
Or even if you're just insanely curious about how empires are built from scratch, honestly.
Okay, exactly. This is for you. We are embarking on this intense, really serious documentary-style exploration of a massive archive of Silicon Valley lecture transcripts.
Yeah, these are the holy grail documents.
They really are. Specifically, we're diving deep into the raw operational playbooks from the founders and the key players behind Airbnb, Stripe, Pinterest, Facebook, PayPal, and Y Combinator.
The heavy hitters.
Right. We are pulling heavily from their foundational talks, especially those legendary sessions on hiring and culture from Lecture 11.
And we should probably clarify right up front. I mean, this isn't a cheery, motivational, how to build a cool app and get rich kind of conversation.
Oh, absolutely not.
We are looking at the structural forces, the often pretty brutal power dynamics, and the intense human psychology that's required to scale a group of erratic human beings into a global powerhouse.
Yeah, because humans are messy. So our mission today is to extract the hidden blueprint. We want to know how 2 people sitting in a garage manage to engineer a culture that actually survives its own success.
Which most don't, by the way.
Right, most fail. So we're going to decode the counterintuitive laws of hiring, the ruthless necessity of radical transparency, and that incredibly precarious tightrope walk of managing human ego as a company goes from 0 to, thousands of employees.
It's quite the journey.
So let's unpack this, because building a startup team, it's like trying to build a plane while you are already in free fall.
Oh, they love that analogy.
Right. Your first few hires are the wings, but eventually you have to build an entire corporate airline without ever hitting the ground. So before a company can scale, before it becomes this sprawling institution with HR departments and middle managers, it requires a nucleus.
Yes, the very beginning.
Let's look at the absolute genesis of the power dynamic. The founders themselves and those hypercritical first 10 employees. Because whoever those first 10 people are, they will dictate the genetic makeup of the next 10,000.
A Genesis code. I love calling it that. And, the very first thing we have to do here is completely shatter a pervasive, almost romanticized myth about startups.
Let's shatter it.
Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, he refers to this as the myth of the panopticon of skills.
Okay, panopticon of skills. Explain that.
So in popular culture, the media loves to paint this image of the super founder. We think of a Steve Jobs, a Bill Gates, or a Mark Zuckerberg as this flawless, omniscient superhero.
Like they just woke up perfect at everything.
Exactly. We assume they are a 10 out of 10 in product vision, a 10 in hardcore software engineering, a 10 in people management, and like a 10 in venture capital fundraising.
Right, which is impossible.
It's totally impossible. And what is fascinating when you read through the actual historical accounts from these builders is that they explicitly state, this is a complete fiction.
No.
The super founder does not exist.
Right, because if you assume you need to be a superhero to start a company, you'll literally never start one.
Never. You'd be paralyzed.
I mean, even the smartest people on the planet have massive, glaring blind spots. If you're a visionary product designer, you might be absolutely terrible at managing a balance sheet or, having difficult interpersonal conversations.
Precisely. And that's why a great founding team is rarely a solo act. And more importantly, It's not built on peaceful, frictionless agreement.
Oh, definitely not peaceful.
Right. It's built on rigorous collaboration and, crucially, on productive friction. It's about co-founders actively helping each other claw their way to the truth.
Do we have a good example of that from the sources?
Yet Hoffman gives a brilliant historical example from the very early days of PayPal. So you had Max Lifton, who is this brilliant technical mind, right? He's building these incredibly complex cryptographic fraud prevention systems
Like deep in the code.
deep in the code. And then you had Peter Thiel, who was the macro thinker and the CEO.
Oh,
And Levchin would routinely walk into Thiel's office and essentially tell him, right to his face, exactly what was broken, what Thiel was doing wrong, and what was basically going to kill the company that week.
wow. So they weren't exactly sitting around singing Kumbaya and validating each other's feelings.
Not at all. They were actively adjusting to reality. The conversation was always, what is the actual truth of our situation, and what is the specific problem we need to solve today?
That's intense.
It is, but it's that collective problem solving, that rigorous, almost combative learning process that makes a founding team resilient. If you have two co-founders who agree on absolutely everything, well, one of them is redundant.
Yeah, you only need one of them then. So it's less about being Superman and more about having a partner who isn't afraid to tell you when you're holding kryptonite.
That's a great way to put it.
But, okay, if Y Combinator and these massive incubators aren't looking for superheroes, what exactly is the standard? Sam Altman brings up a really memorable heuristic for this in the lectures. He says that the ultimate standard for co-founders is that they need to be relentlessly resourceful.
Relentlessly resourceful.
Right. They need to be unflappable and they need to be tough. He actually tells every incoming class of startup founders that they need to behave like James Bond.
The James Bond model, I mean, it sounds a bit cinematic, maybe a little cliche on the surface, but...
It does sound like a movie pitch.
Right. But if we break down the psychology of what Altman is actually saying, it makes perfect sense for a high-stress environment. Think about what James Bond does in a movie.
He blows things up mostly.
Well, yes, but when everything goes wrong, when the villain has him trapped, when the countdown timer is at 7 seconds, when the allies have turned out to be double agents, Bond doesn't freeze.
No, he doesn't panic.
He doesn't sit down and write a white paper about why the situation is unfair. He looks at the ticking bomb, finds the blue wire, and cuts it while adjusting his cuffs. He has an absolute overriding bias toward action.
Because indecisiveness is a startup killer.
It is the primary killer.
Yeah.
Mediocre founders will sit in a room and talk about grand, sweeping strategic plans for 6 months, but never actually ship a single piece of code.
Just endless whiteboard sessions.
Exactly. Bond acts. Even if it's the wrong action, taking action generates new data, which allows you to course correct. You need founders who process panic into immediate, practical movement.
Okay, so you have your two relentlessly resourceful James Bonds. You're sitting in the garage, you've got your laptops, and you have like a tiny bit of funding. Now you need to hire your very first employee.
This is where it gets scary.
Yeah, listening to these lectures, the anxiety around these early hires is just palpable. They view early hiring as an exercise in extreme, almost paralyzing caution.
They really do.
Altman points out a sign that a friend of his keeps permanently mounted in their interview room. It just says, "Mediocre engineers do not build great companies."
Simple, but brutal.
Very brutal. He goes so far as to say that a single bad hire in your first 5 employees can literally mathematically kill the startup.
And I really want you, the listener, to grasp that this is not hyperbole. Let's look at the structural difference between a massive corporation and a tiny startup for a second.
Let's do it.
If you are listening to this and you work at a company with, say, 10,000 employees, a mediocre hire just falls through the cracks. They get absorbed by the sheer mass of the bureaucracy.
Yeah, they might just hide in middle management for a decade.
Exactly. They might slow down a specific project, but they aren't going to bankrupt the firm. But at a startup of 5 people, every single person represents 20% of the company's total culture and output.
20%, that's massive.
It's huge. Every single person you hire in those first 10 slots is going to eventually be managing, setting the tone for, and interviewing the next 100 people.
Keith Robob points this out perfectly. He says, you aren't just hiring one person, You are hiring the 100 people that this first person will eventually bring along or influence.
Yes.
If you compromise on quality just because you're tired of interviewing, you're basically baking mediocrity into the very DNA of your future organization. It's like a genetic mutation that will replicate itself endlessly as the company grows.
But this introduces a massive structural paradox.
How so?
Because early startups are what John and Patrick Collison, the brothers who founded Stripe, call ugly ducklings.
Right. They aren't swans yet.
Exactly. You are a founder with no money, you have a tiny, unproven product that probably crashes half the time, and the candidates you're trying to hire, their friends, their parents, their professors, are all actively telling them not to join your company.
Because it's a massive career risk.
Right. It will likely end in failure. So how on earth do you hire the best engineers in the world when you cannot offer them the prestige, the stability, or the massive salaries of a Google, an Apple, or a Meta?
This is where it gets incredibly fascinating to me. You have to act like a Wall Street value investor, but for human capital.
Yes. Value investing in talent.
This is a concept Ben Silbermann from Pinterest and the Collison brothers strongly advocate. You have to accept that you simply cannot compete for established, proven, highly credentialed talent.
You just don't have the cash.
Right. If someone is a known spectacular quantity, say a senior engineer at Facebook, they are already highly compensated. They are comfortable, their market value is perfectly priced.
They're blue chip stock.
Exactly. So, as a scrappy startup, you have to draft for undervalued, quirky human capital. You are looking for people who are brilliant, but whose brilliance the wider market hasn't figured out how to price in yet.
And you see this pattern repeated across almost every successful tech giant's origin story. You are looking for anomalies. The Collison brothers talk about hiring their early designer.
Oh, this story is wild.
It really is. They didn't poach a senior art director from a fancy ad agency in New York. They found an 18-year-old high school student living in Sweden who was just obsessively making incredible designs on the internet in his spare time.
Just some kid in his bedroom.
Yeah. The market didn't value him because he didn't have a degree and he was a teenager, but Stripe valued his raw output.
Ben Silbermann at Pinterest has a super similar story. He talks about interviewing a guy whose primary claim to fame wasn't, a computer science degree from Stanford. His claim to fame was that he was just incredibly obsessed with magic tricks.
Magic tricks.
I know. He actually coded a complex magic trick app for the early iPhone and then went through all the trouble of shooting, editing, and producing a whole video to showcase it.
That takes dedication.
It does. Silberman said they didn't care about his resume. They looked at that and saw someone who was incredibly curious, who had an elaborate obsessive hobby, and who had the actual execution skills to take a weird idea all the way to a finished product.
It forces us to completely redefine a terrible Silicon Valley cliche. The mythical 10x person.
Oh, I hate that term.
Everyone hates it. For years, people have thrown around this idea that you need to hire a 10x genius, the solitary hacker, who can outcode 10 regular engineers in a dark room.
Right, fueled by energy drinks and misanthropy.
Exactly. It's a toxic and mostly false archetype. But Patrick Collison offers a much more grounded, usable definition for the rest of us. He says a 10x person isn't a generic superhero. They are simply the absolute best person among all their friends at what they do.
Just the peak of their localized network.
Exactly. If you find a group of 5 friends who are all into programming or design or writing, who is the one that the other 4 look up to?
Who do they go to for help?
Right. Who is the one that cares just a little too deeply about getting the tiny details right? If you find the best person in a specific, obscure friend group, and they have that obsessive trait, that is your undervalued asset. You hire them before the wider market realizes how good they are.
I love that framing. If you're listening to this and you're familiar with sports analogies, this entire early hiring phase feels exactly like the movie Moneyball.
Oh, perfect analogy.
Right. You're Brad Pitt sitting in the locker room of the Oakland A's. You're looking at your budget, looking at the rich teams like the Yankees, and realizing you simply cannot afford the established all-stars.
You'd go bankrupt trying.
Exactly. So you stop looking at traditional metrics. You draft for bizarre, undervalued stats. You look at a guy who throws funny or a guy who has a weird stance but who mathematically just gets on base.
He just gets results.
Yep. In the startup world, you're drafting for raw ambition, a quirky obsession with magic tricks, or just sheer unrelenting curiosity.
You are essentially exploiting a market inefficiency in human resources.
But okay, let me push back on this for a second. If I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, well, that makes for a great underdog movie script. But reality is messy.
Very messy.
If you're only hiring the quirky, the obsessive, the unproven, the 18-year-old kids in Sweden,
Well, wild cards.
yeah, the wild cards, aren't you just baking massive operational risk into the very foundation of your company? You are building a machine out of total anomalies. How do you prevent these fiercely independent people from just tearing the company apart with their own eccentricities?
That is the exact right question to ask, and it highlights the fundamental danger of the Moneyball approach to hiring. Because you are absolutely right. A team of fiercely independent, quirky, obsessive underdogs will inevitably clash.
It's guaranteed.
They are highly volatile raw materials. If you just put 20 brilliant, obsessive weirdos in a room and say, build a product, you will not get a product.
You'll get a reality TV show.
You will get chaos, infighting, and burnout. Therefore, there must be a unifying operating system to govern them. The narrative has to shift here. We have to move from who you hire to how their behavior is governed on a day-to-day basis.
Which brings us to the concept of the black box, because this is where the survival of the company is actually decided.
Alfred Lin, who was a legendary operational executive at Zappos before becoming a venture capitalist, he synthesizes this brilliantly. He asks us to imagine a company as a complex system, a black box.
Okay, a black box.
The outputs of that box are the things everyone pays attention to. Your financial results, your product launches, your user growth, your stock price. Most managers obsess entirely over the output.
Sure, the numbers on the spreadsheet.
Right. But if you understand systems thinking, you know that to control the output, you have to control the primary raw input going into the box. And that raw input is culture.
Culture is such a corporate buzzword, though. People hear culture and they immediately think of, like, ping pong tables and free kombucha in the break room.
Right, which is a tragic misunderstanding of the concept. Culture isn't perks. Culture is the set of first principles you fall back on when you have to make a painful decision.
When things go wrong.
Exactly. It's the shared way of doing things that remains constant, even as the product pivots, the market crashes, or the executives leave. It is the unwritten behavioral contract of the organization.
And no one took the engineering of this behavioral contract more seriously than Airbnb. Brian Chesky, the CEO, details their legendary search for their very first engineer. They literally looked for this single person for 5 months.
5 months. For one person.
One engineer. They interviewed hundreds of people. They rejected brilliant coders because they didn't have the right vibe. But here is the truly crazy part. Chesky and his co-founders actually wrote down their core cultural values before they hired a single employee.
That is almost unheard of.
They sat down and decided exactly what philosophical principles would define the company for the next 50 years, while they were still just 3 guys eating ramen in a tiny apartment.
Think about the immense discipline that requires. You are bleeding cash, your product desperately needs to be built, your investors are breathing down your neck, and you spend 5 months refusing to hire anyone because they don't perfectly match a philosophical document you wrote in your living room.
It sounds insane from the outside.
It does. But Chesky understood the math of the Genesis code we talked about earlier. That first engineer wasn't just there to ship 3 software features. That person was bringing behavioral DNA into the company.
Right, they're setting the mold.
Chesky asked himself a very specific question with every single candidate. If I hire this person, do I want to work with 100 or 1,000 more people exactly like them?
Because they will clone themselves.
Exactly. Because that first hire will inevitably clone their own behaviors, their own work ethic, and their own communication style as they eventually build out their own departments.
To ensure they got this right, Chesky used an interview question that is, frankly, mind-blowing. Imagine you were sitting in an interview for a tech job. You're expecting to be asked to write some code on a whiteboard.
Typical tech interview.
Right. Instead, Chesky looks at you and asks, if you only had 1 year left to live, would you take this job?
It is a stunning question. And he actually admits he eventually had to amend it to 10 years to live.
Huh. Why did he change it?
Because he realized that if someone only had 1 year to live and chose to spend their final 365 days on Earth writing database queries for a startup, there was probably something deeply psychologically wrong with them.
Yeah, they should probably go be with their family.
Right. But even amended to 10 years to live, think about the intense psychology of that question. Chesky wanted employees to bleed for the mission.
He wasn't looking for mercenaries.
Exactly. He didn't want people who just wanted a high valuation, a quick payout, and a nice line on their resume. By asking that question, he was establishing a profound power dynamic right at the interview stage. He was making it explicitly clear. This startup demands total existential life commitment. You aren't joining a company, you are joining a cause.
And that level of commitment isn't just demanded, it is forged in the trauma of the early days. Founding stories become the mythology that sustains the culture when the company eventually becomes a massive, boring corporation.
Like a religion.
Exactly. You brought up Airbnb. If we are talking about culture, we absolutely have to talk about the Obama
Oh,
oath.
the Obama O's a classic.
This is easily one of my favorite startup stories of all time, so set the scene. It's the fall of 2008. Airbnb is completely broke. They are drowning in tens of thousands of dollars of personal credit card debt.
Just maxing out card after card.
They are keeping the website alive by putting hosting charges in physical 3-ring binders because they've maxed out so many cards. They are desperate. To fund the company during the 2008 presidential election, they come up with a ridiculous idea.
It was ridiculous.
They literally bought massive quantities of bulk cereal, designed and printed their own custom cardboard cereal boxes featuring the candidates Barack Obama and John McCain, and sold these novelty Obama O's and Cap McCain's cereals for $40 a pop at convention events.
$40 for a box of cereal in 2008.
And they sold enough novelty cereal to keep the servers turned on and save the company.
It's an incredible story of survival. But what's truly fascinating here is how that story functions structurally years later. Today, Airbnb is a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar juggernaut.
Right. They have virtually unlimited resources now.
But they still talk about Obama O's in their orientation for new hires. Why? Because that story permanently embeds frugality and scrappiness into the company's DNA. It sends a subconscious message to a 5,000th employee. We do not waste money here. We hustle. We survive.
It's a behavioral control mechanism.
Yes, masquerading as a fun, quirky, historical anecdote.
But there is a catch. Chesky warns that focusing this heavily on culture comes with a massive, painful cost. He calls it the deepest paradox of company building.
The paradox of culture.
He says that if your goal is to build a company and just sell it to Google in 1 year to get rich, the absolute best piece of advice he can give you is to actively ignore culture. Ignore it completely. Just hire as fast as humanly possible, get the product out, and flip it.
Yes, because culture is friction. Culture forces you to move slowly. It forces you to spend 5 months hiring one engineer. It forces you to reject a brilliant 10x coder because they are arrogant or they treat the receptionist poorly.
Which hurts in the short term.
It hurts immensely. Caring about culture means making deliberate, painful short-term sacrifices, like missing a product deadline because you wouldn't compromise on a hire to ensure the long-term survival of the institution. It does not pay off in the short term. It is purely a long-term investment.
Okay, I have to step in and challenge this paradigm, though. Let's look objectively at that 10 years to live interview question, or the expectation that you, quote, bleed for the company.
Let's look at it.
If you are listening to this and you've worked in toxic corporate environments, your alarm bells are probably ringing right now. Isn't demanding that level of existential commitment from a regular employee creating an incredibly toxic power dynamic?
It can definitely lean that way.
I mean, you have a founder who stands to make billions of dollars if the company succeeds, asking a mid-level engineer who might get a fraction of a % of equity to sacrifice their youth, their mental health, their weekends, their family time. How do founders ask for that without crossing the line into outright manipulation and exploitation?
That is the razor's edge of Silicon Valley. And it is a brilliant, necessary pushback. It's the dark underbelly of the startup mythos, really. And the individuals in these lecture archives, particularly people like Dustin Moskovitz, one of the co-founders of Facebook, actually touch on this tension.
What does he say?
Moskovitz explicitly pushes back against the myth of the crunch time founder who sleeps under their desk and demands their employees do the same. He argues mathematically that burnout destroys companies and that working 80 hours a week actually yields negative productivity over time.
Because people just make more mistakes.
Exactly. But to answer your question about manipulation, the ethical line is drawn at transparency. As Ben Silbermann points out, you cannot whitewash the risks. You must tell candidates exactly how brutal it will be before they sign the paperwork.
Give me an example of that transparency. Like, what does that sound like in an interview?
Silbermann references the early days of PayPal and the legendary stories of the original iPhone engineering team at Apple. The recruiters for those teams didn't pitch work-life balance.
No, work hard, play hard slogans.
Right. They would explicitly sit the candidate down and say, if you join this team, you will not see your family for 3 years. Your competitors are massive and they want to kill you. The hours we're going to ask you to work might be borderline illegal in some countries.
Wow. Brutally honest.
It is going to be painful. But if we succeed, we are going to put a dent in the universe and change the world. It is only manipulation if you hide the cost. If you are radically transparent about the pain, and the candidate actively chooses it because they crave the challenge and want to be part of history, it becomes alignment.
I see.
But, and this is the crucial caveat, it only works if the founder is actually in the trenches suffering with them and actually shares the financial upside.
Which perfectly sets up the next major phase of our exploration. Let's say you do it. You navigate the Genesis code. You hire your 20 quirky James Bonds. You weed out the mercenaries.
We've got your core team.
You build this intense cult-like intimacy in a single room where everyone bleeds for the mission, everyone knows the core values, and everyone knows what everyone else is working on. You are moving incredibly fast. But then you hire your 26th employee, and according to the mathematics of scaling, the entire machine suddenly catches fire.
Yes. We are transitioning from the startup phase to the scaling phase. The intense intimacy, that telepathic communication of the early days, it simply cannot survive the sheer weight of adding more human beings to the system.
Because humans don't scale like servers do.
Exactly. Sam Altman highlights this specifically as the magical 25-employee breaking point.
Why exactly 25, though? What is the math behind that specific number?
It comes down to the mathematics of network nodes. Think about lines of communication. If you have a company of 5 people, the formula for how many unique relationships exist is n times n minus 1 divided by 2.
Okay, so 5 times 4 is 20, divided by 2 is 10.
Exactly. So for 5 people, there are 10 unique lines of communication. It's easy to manage. Everyone can literally sit around one table and hear every single conversation. Zero structure works perfectly.
Right, because you just yell across the room.
But as you add people, the lines of communication grow exponentially, not linearly. At 25 people, you suddenly have 300 unique lines of communication. At 50 people, you have over 1,200 lines.
The human brain cannot track 1,200 unique relationships.
It physically can't. The informal, everyone knows everything system collapses under its own weight.
So at 30 or 40 employees, zero structure results in disastrous failure. The telepathy breaks down. People don't know what the daily priorities are. You end up with 2 engineers accidentally writing the exact same piece of code, or worse, working against each other.
Exactly. And Altman says this is the precise moment the founder's job fundamentally shifts. They have to undergo a sort of psychological death and rebirth. They are no longer building a great product. They are now building a great company.
And that is a brutal, deeply uncomfortable transition for a founder who just wants to put their headphones on and write code or design interfaces.
It leads to what we can call the hero syndrome. The founder, who is used to doing everything better and faster than anyone else in the room, tries to hold on to control.
I've seen this happen so many times.
Right. They see a junior employee struggling with a design, and instead of coaching them, the founder pushes them aside and says, just let me do it. They try to micromanage 40 people. They believe they are the next Steve Jobs, but instead of saving the day, they become a massive organizational bottleneck.
Because the company can only move as fast as the founder can make decisions. If every decision, from the color of a button to a major server architecture shift, has to cross the founder's desk, the company just stops moving.
The wheels fall off.
The founder burns out working 100 hours a week, and ironically, the highly talented employees you spent months hiring, they leave. Because they realize they have absolutely no autonomy. They're just being treated like glorified assistants.
So how do you fix it? How does a founder let go without letting the company crash into a mountain?
Well, Keith Rabois, who is a senior executive at PayPal, LinkedIn, and Square, he provides one of the most brilliant operational analogies I have ever heard for management. He says that to survive this phase shift, an executive has to transition into being an editor.
An editor. It's a profound shift in professional identity. A manager's job isn't to write the content anymore. It is to simplify, clarify, and use red ink to fix the structural problems in other people's work.
Right. Think of a world-class publication like The Economist. If you read The Economist, every article sounds like it was written by the exact same incredibly smart person, even though they employ dozens of different writers all around the world.
That is the magic of the editor.
Exactly. The editor's job is to ensure a consistent voice and eliminate sloppy thinking. In a company, the founder editor has to look at the work their team is producing and strike out the unnecessary complexity.
Using that red pen.
Yeah. If an employee brings you a convoluted 5-step plan to launch a feature, you take your metaphorical red pen, cross out 3 steps, simplify the logic, and hand it back.
And Rabois says the ultimate metric of a good manager is not how many brilliant ideas you come up with. The ultimate metric is that you are using less red ink over time.
Because the team is learning.
The team learns the voice of the company, they learn how you think, they learn the first principles, and eventually they bring you work that requires absolutely no editing at all.
But to deploy that red ink effectively, you have to understand the structural dynamic of your human capital. You have to know who you are editing. Rabois introduces this concept of barrels and ammunition to explain how you scale a workforce.
This is a controversial one.
It is. In any growing company, the vast majority of employees are ammunition. And I know, as we sit here, that sounds like a deeply derogatory, almost dehumanizing term.
It does sound harsh, but structurally, it isn't meant as an insult. It simply means they are highly specialized, highly capable individuals who need to be aimed.
Right.
They are brilliant back-end engineers, incredibly talented graphic designers, razor-sharp copywriters. But if you just put a room full of ammunition together without a target, nothing happens. They lack the generalist project management skills to marshal resources. They need direction. Therefore, a scaling startup desperately needs barrels.
A barrel is someone who can take an abstract idea from its absolute inception. Say, we need to improve our checkout flow, scope out the problem, marshal the necessary resources, recruit people from different departments to help them, and push the product all the way through the friction of the organization to shipping without ever needing the founder to hold their hand.
They are a force of nature.
Rabois says you can identify the barrels in your company just by standing back and watching the open office. Who are the people that everyone naturally migrates toward when they have a problem, even if they don't report to them?
Those are your barrels.
Yep. You promote them instantly, you give them resources, and you aim them at your most existential threats.
Okay, I love the editor analogy, but I have to push back on the barrels and ammunition framework. You just said ammunition isn't derogatory, but let's look at human nature.
Okay, let's look at it.
If you construct a corporate hierarchy where all the glory, all the autonomy, all the promotional power, and all the massive stock grants go to the barrels, the generalists, the talkers, the project managers.
The people running the meetings.
Exactly. Don't you risk deeply alienating the ammunition. These are the highly specialized coders and designers who are actually doing the heavy lifting. They are writing the code that makes the company run. How do you keep the ammo from turning against the barrel in a fit of resentment?
That is the exact tension that creates toxic corporate politics in legacy companies if it is not managed correctly. And the raw transcripts from these lectures provide a very specific structural solution. You must completely decouple compensation and respect from the management track.
Decouple them. How?
Rabois specifically notes that in the early days of PayPal, Peter Thiel outright refused to hire general managers. The VP of engineering wasn't a guy with an MBA who liked to hold meetings. It was simply the best, most capable engineer. The VP of design was the best designer.
You promote people who are actually kicking ass at their specific discipline, not just people who are good at playing office politics.
Precisely. You have to create a dual-track system. If you create a culture where the ammunition, the individual contributors, can make just as much money and have just as much prestige as a manager without ever having to actually manage people, the resentment vanishes.
Ah, that makes sense.
You allow them to focus entirely on their craft without dragging them into 5 hours of management meetings they hate. When you do that, they don't resent the barrels. They actually come to rely on the barrels to absorb all the organizational friction, the budget approvals, and the cross-departmental arguments, so the individual contributor can just put their headphones on and do their best work.
So the barrel's job isn't to boss the ammunition around. The barrel's job is to act as a heat shield, absorbing the organizational friction so the ammunition can fly straight and hit the target.
Exactly. But if the founder successfully steps back into this editor role and empowers these barrels to run their own teams, a massive new structural threat immediately emerges.
There's always a new threat.
Always. If you have 200 or 500 employees and the founder isn't in every room making every decision, how do you ensure this growing army doesn't run in 100 different contradictory directions? How do you maintain that unified, intense culture?
Which brings us to the architecture of information. Let's talk about the panopticon and the weaponization of radical transparency.
The panopticon. Sounds ominous.
It is a bit, yeah. The central problem of any large organization is something economists call the principal agent problem. For the listener, the simplest way to explain this is to think of selling a house.
Okay, selling a house.
You are the principal. You want to sell your house for the absolute highest price possible. You hire a real estate agent, the agent. The agent gets, let's say, a 3% commission. If they sell your house for $500,000 today, they get $15,000.
Right, good payday.
If they spend 3 extra months working incredibly hard to get you $550,000, they only make an extra $1,500. For the agent, the extra months of work aren't worth the tiny bump in commission.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
So the agent pressures you to take the first lower offer. What is locally optimal for the agent, a quick, easy sale, is terrible for the principal.
And that exact dynamic destroys large companies.
Yes. An employee might want to build a new feature using a flashy experimental programming language because it will look fantastic on their personal resume, even if it delays the company's product launch by a month and introduces bugs.
What's good for the agent isn't good for the principal.
Exactly. Large corporations suffer immensely from this misalignment. Startups fight the principal-agent problem by making all information aggressively transparent. If everyone sees everything, it forces alignment. You can't hide your selfish motives in the dark.
And when we say radical transparency in the context of these startups, we mean radical. Let's look at Stripe again. John and Patrick Collison implemented a system in the early days where basically all internal emails were visible to the entire company.
All of them.
Almost all of them. Imagine you are a new hire. You sit down at your desk on day one, you open your inbox, and you experience the absolute shock of receiving 2,000 emails in your first week.
That would give me an anxiety attack.
You could search and read the unvarnished communication between the marketing team and the engineering team, even if you had absolutely nothing to do with either.
It forces a massive behavioral shift across the entire company. Keith Rabois talks about an operational mandate he pushed everywhere he went. All conference rooms must have glass walls.
Glass walls, like literal architecture.
Literal architecture. Now, to a casual observer, that just seems like a trendy modern design detail. But structurally, it is a profound management tool. Think about a traditional company with opaque, drywall conference rooms. When 2 senior executives walk into a room, close the door, and pull the blinds, what happens outside?
Paranoia blooms.
Gossip spreads like a virus. The employees wonder, are there layoffs coming? Is my project getting canceled? Is there a secret reorg? If you mandate glass walls, anyone walking by to get a coffee can see exactly who is meeting with whom.
It instantly deflates the paranoia. You can't have secret cabals in a glass box.
Transparency acts as a disinfectant. And the ultimate tool of this transparency, the thing that keeps the barrels aimed at the same target, is the dashboard.
The famous startup dashboard.
Rabois insists that the founder, not a junior product manager, not a data analyst, but the founder themselves, must draw the metrics dashboard on a whiteboard. You have to clearly, mathematically define what success looks like for the entire business.
And this dashboard becomes the literal heartbeat of the company. Rabois says the key metric of success for a founder is what fraction of your employees voluntarily check that dashboard every single day.
If 100% of your 200 employees are logging in and looking at the exact same numbers every morning, it forces total alignment.
You establish what growth hackers call a North Star metric. Alex Schultz, who ran growth at Facebook, talks about this extensively in his lectures. You have to pick one metric that matters above all else, and it's rarely just revenue.
Right, it has to be more specific.
During the early days of eBay, their North Star metric wasn't revenue. It was gross merchandise volume, the total value of goods sold by users on the platform. Every single person, from the deepest back-end engineer to the frontline customer support rep, was aligned toward increasing that one specific number. If a project didn't increase GMV, you just didn't do it.
It's a beautiful theory. Everyone rowing in the exact same direction, illuminated by the pure light of radical transparency.
But I'm going to pull the parachute on this for a second.
Oh boy.
If you're listening, you might be thinking this sounds like a total nightmare. Let's look at the dark side of the panopticon. In the Stripe lecture, they explicitly mention a phenomenon they call stage fright.
Stage fright, yeah.
If I am an employee, and I know that every Slack message I send, every email I draft, every half-baked experimental idea I propose is subject to the immediate public scrutiny of 170 brilliant, highly opinionated engineers.
It's terrifying.
Doesn't radical transparency actually backfire? Doesn't it force people to be less honest? Don't they just opt for safe, performative, corporate speak instead of candid, messy problem solving because they are terrified of a public pile-on?
It's a brilliant observation, and what's fascinating is that the Collison brothers openly acknowledge this exact vulnerability in their system. When everything is public, you invite drive-by criticism.
Yeah, the peanut gallery.
Exactly. You might have someone from the accounting department drop into a highly technical engineering thread and offer a completely uninformed, distracting opinion, derailing the entire conversation. The only way radical transparency works without creating a paralyzing, toxic surveillance state is if the founders actively develop incredibly strong cultural norms around how to use the information.
How do you train that? You can't just send a memo saying, be nice.
No, you have to actively train people to assume good intent, and you have to train them not to jump in with immediate unhelpful criticism. You have to curate the fire hose. Eventually, as Stripe scaled, they couldn't literally have everyone read every email.
It would be impossible at 1,000 people.
They had to build sophisticated internal tooling so people only subscribed to the channels and streams of information relevant to them. But the core principle remains intact. The access to the information is what prevents the political silos that kill large companies. Even if you don't read the email, knowing you can read the email keeps everyone honest.
So transparency works wonders when the numbers on the dashboard are going up, the market is hot, and everyone is behaving. But the true structural integrity of a scaling startup is tested when things go horribly wrong.
Always.
Radical transparency is easy when you're passing out high fives and stock options. It is utterly brutal when the founder has to exercise raw power over an individual's livelihood in full view of the company.
Which brings us to the crucible of crisis. Managing people, specifically, managing their egos and their compensation is the hardest part of scaling. And Ben Horowitz, one of the most respected operational minds in the Valley, provides a masterclass on this in the archives.
He does. It's legendary.
Horowitz outlines what we can call the golden rule of executive management. Every critical HR decision must be viewed not just through the eyes of the person sitting across the desk from you, but through the eyes of the employees who aren't in the room.
Yes, the unseen audience. He gives two incredibly specific, painful examples of how founders screw this up. Let's walk through them.
Go for it.
First, the demotion trap. Imagine you have an executive. Let's say he's your VP of sales. He was one of your first hires. He's a great guy. He works from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Everyone loves him. He bleeds for the culture, and he is putting in maximum effort.
Sounds like a model employee.
But he is simply out of his depth. He was great at taking you from 0 to 1 million in revenue, but he fundamentally lacks the skills to scale the company from 10 million to 100 million. You desperately need to bring someone else in above him.
It happens all the time.
All the time. The easy, emotionally comfortable path is to demote him. You tell yourself, he works so hard, it's a win-win. We keep his institutional knowledge in the company. I don't have to have a painful firing conversation that makes me look like a bad guy, and we get the new senior expertise we need.
It feels like the humane, empathetic choice.
It does.
But Horowitz brutally dissects the structural fallout of this choice. Remember the Genesis code we talked about? This executive was brought in early. He has, let's say, 1.5% equity in the entire company.
Which is a fortune if the company succeeds.
Now, apply the rule of the unseen audience. Think about the brilliant junior engineers who are working 80 hours a week to actually build the product right now. They might have 0.1% or 0.2% equity.
Oh, this is going to get ugly.
Horowitz asks the CEO, how is that brilliant engineer going to feel when they realize they have to take orders from a demoted, failed regional manager who is sitting on 1.5% of the company? What does it explicitly say to the rest of the organization about failure?
It says that as long as you are a nice guy and you try hard, you get to keep millions of dollars in equity and coast even if you objectively fail at your job.
Exactly. It absolutely destroys the concept of a meritocracy. And furthermore, human nature being what it is, will anyone actually respect this person now that they've been publicly stripped of their title?
The answer is almost always no. By trying to avoid one painful, awkward 20-minute conversation with a friend, the CEO poisons the psychological water supply for the entire engineering department.
It's toxic.
And then Horowitz gives an even better, more relatable example. The raise. An excellent, high-performing employee comes into your office and asks for a raise. They've done their market research, they leaned in, they genuinely deserve it. You have the budget, you want to give it to them. It feels great to be a benevolent boss and say, yes, you think you just had a private, positive transaction.
But in a scaling company, it is never private. Horowitz calls the aftermath of this the Bobby Shmurda dance.
Okay, yes, if you are listening to this, you have to visualize this scenario. You give the employee the massive raise. They are absolutely thrilled. They walk out of your glass-walled office, and they are literally doing a celebratory dance down the open-plan hallway. They are high-fiving people.
And every other employee in the company sees it. Now, apply Horowitz's rule again. Look at this exact moment through the eyes of the employee who didn't ask for a raise. Maybe they are actually a vastly better performer than the person dancing down the hall.
But they're just quieter?
Right, they are introverted, or they just put their head down and do the work, trusting that their hard work will be recognized. What did you, the founder, just teach them?
You taught them that actual performance doesn't dictate compensation. The only way to get a raise in this company is to aggressively politically demand one.
Yes, you have essentially created a fiduciary responsibility for every single employee to constantly hound you for more money, because if they don't, they're leaving money on the table.
You've weaponized your own team against yourself. You've incentivized politics over execution. So what is the solution? How do you reward good people without triggering the dance?
You have to do the one thing startup founders absolutely despise.
Yeah.
You have to embrace bureaucracy.
The dreaded B word.
Founders hate this. They want to be organic, they want to be cool, they want to be anti-corporate. But Horowitz says you must use formal, rigid HR processes to save your organic culture. You create a strict, unbreakable review cycle, say, every 6 months.
So no off-cycle raises.
If someone comes into your office and asks for an off-cycle raise, you say no. You tell them, I appreciate your hard work, I will evaluate you, I will gather 360-degree feedback, and I will give you a raise during the formal review period in November if the data shows you deserve it.
It feels cold.
It does. But by putting a rigid, boring structure in place, you actually remove the anxiety from the system. Employees don't have to worry about playing politics, wondering if their peers are secretly negotiating better deals. They know the system will evaluate them fairly. The rigid structure actually protects the creative freedom of the culture.
And when it comes to the ultimate crisis, the archives are unanimous, and it ties right back to our opening story about the hostage servers. Sam Altman says that almost every first-time founder waits way too long to fire someone.
Always.
They are empathetic, they hope the person will turn it around, they put them on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. But when someone is toxic, when they are persistently negative, or when they are actively creating office politics, you have to cut them out immediately, like a tumor.
I have to.
Carolyn Levy and Kirsty Nathu, the legal and financial backbone of Y Combinator, are the ones who share that terrifying cautionary tale from earlier. A company fired an employee, but they didn't do it cleanly. They tried to be nice, gave them a long transition period, and didn't revoke access immediately. And that terminated employee literally locked the company out of its own systems.
Which is why the mandate is to fire quickly and cleanly. It sounds ruthless, but it is actually the most empathetic thing you can do for the rest of the team who is suffering under that toxic employee.
Right, it's empathetic to the people staying.
Exactly. Repurchase their unvested shares, cut off all physical and digital access instantly, hand them a generous severance package, and rip the bandage off. It is the most professional thing a founder can do.
Okay, I want to use an analogy here to summarize this phase, because the psychological weight of what we are talking about is staggering. Listening to Horowitz, it feels like the CEO is essentially coding a master algorithm for human behavior.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. Every time you give a raise or demote someone or fire someone, you aren't just making a one-off decision for the person sitting in front of you. You are writing a line of code into the permanent cultural operating system of the company. If you teach the algorithm that complaining equals a raise, the system will execute that loop infinitely.
And eventually crash the system.
Exactly. How does a human being, a founder who might be 24 years old and just wanted to build a cool app bear, the psychological weight of knowing every minor HR decision is rewriting the laws of physics for their company?
It's an incredibly heavy burden, and the reality is that many founders completely break under it. They step down, or they bring in an experienced CEO to replace them. But the ones who survive and become the legends of the industry do so by institutionalizing the process.
Institutionalizing.
They realize they cannot rely on their own personal judgment, their own memory, or their own charisma to hold the company together anymore. They have to transition the startup from a cult of personality centered around the founders into a self-sustaining institution. Which brings us to our final exploration, institutionalizing the how and the why.
Right. As the startup scales past 150 people into the hundreds or thousands, the founder's direct influence dilutes dramatically. You can't be in every interview anymore. You can't edit every document. You can't draw the dashboard on the whiteboard yourself.
There's not enough time in the day.
You have to build a machine that runs itself. Sam Altman says the first step in this institutionalization is curing the random oral tradition.
Yes. In the early days, the Genesis phase, culture is transmitted organically. You eat lunch together every day. You literally talk across the table about how to push code, how to talk to frustrated customers, what the design aesthetic should be.
It's very tribal.
But at 300 employees, you physically cannot have lunch with everyone. If you don't explicitly write down how you do things and why you do things, new hires will just rely on whatever random gossip the person sitting next to them tells them.
Oh, we don't care about QA here, just push it live.
Exactly. Altman insists that founders must write these things down. When you codify the culture, when you put it on the internal company wiki, the founder's vision becomes the literal law of the company. It scales your brain.
And as you institutionalize, you have to fiercely protect the lifeblood of the company, which Altman defines simply as momentum. He says his absolute prime directive for managing a scaling startup is to maintain momentum at all costs.
Momentum solves 80% of your problems.
A winning team feels good and keeps winning. They ignore minor inconveniences. But a losing team starts obsessing over competitors. They get bogged down in internal office politics, they start arguing over desk placements, and they die. You institutionalize momentum by establishing an unbreakable operating rhythm, shipping products on a regular, predictable cadence, and celebrating wins publicly to keep the psychological engine running.
But here is the massive looming danger of institutionalization. As you build these formal structures, the rigid HR review cycles, the written wikis, the corporate dashboards, you risk becoming the very thing you set out to disrupt.
A massive, boring corporation.
You risk becoming a faceless, bureaucratic, soulless entity. You risk losing the intimacy and the humanity that made this startup magical in the first place. The ultimate challenge is maintaining intimacy at scale. And Kevin Hale, who founded a company called Wufoo, provides a beautiful, counterintuitive example of how to solve this.
I love the Wufoo story because it breaks all the rules of efficiency. To prevent the company from losing touch with its users as it grew, Hale instituted a strict policy where every single employee, including the hardcore, highly paid back-end engineers who never wanted to talk to a human being, had to do regular customer support shifts.
Can you imagine the pushback on that initially?
Oh, I'm sure it was brutal. Everyone had to interface directly with frustrated, confused users. And even more amazing, they took time every single week to write actual, physical, handwritten thank you notes to their customers.
Now, if you show that to a traditional MBA, they will tell you it's a disaster. It seems like something that definitively does not scale. It seems like a massive waste of highly paid engineering time to have a senior developer answering emails about forgotten passwords.
Just burning cash.
But the structural impact is profound. When an engineer has to sit on the support desk and answer 20 angry emails about a specific bug they wrote the week before, they don't just put it in a backlog.
No, they feel the pain.
They stay late and fix the bug immediately, so they never have to read those emails again.
It creates a deeply personal, social incentive for quality. It proves that you can scale your operations without scaling out your humanity.
That is the holy grail of Silicon Valley.
As Altman notes, doing one great thing, building one cool product, is relatively easy. You push your team, you suffer, you pull all-nighters, and you ship it. But building a company that can do repeatable innovation for decades, like Apple, that is the single hardest thing in business. It requires a culture that is both rigidly structured and fiercely chaotically creative.
So I have to ask the ultimate question here. I'm looking at you, the listener. Think about your own workplace. You hear all these systems we've talked about, the North Star dashboards, the codified wikis, the formal HR structures, the glass walls. Are we just building a machine to automate the passion out of the startup? Are we just taking these brilliant, quirky James Bond weirdos and slowly turning them into cogs in a highly efficient, transparent panopticon?
It's a valid fear. Or are these rigid, sometimes brutal structures the only possible way to protect that original fragile garage mentality from being completely crushed by its own success?
The historical evidence from these archives strongly suggests the latter. Structure isn't the enemy of passion. It is the container that prevents passion from turning into destructive chaos.
The container.
Without the editor with the red pen, without the dashboard aligning the team, without the formal HR process preventing the Bobby Shmurda dance, the raw passion just burns the company down from the inside. The structure is what allows the passion to survive terminal velocity.
Let's wrap this up. We have been on an incredible, dense journey today. We started with two James Bond co-founders sitting in a garage using a Moneyball approach to pick quirky, undervalued talent off the market.
The Genesis code.
We watched them build a black box of culture, embedding their trauma and frugality into the DNA with Obama O's. We hit the terrifying 25-person mathematical breaking point, where the founder had to undergo a psychological death, drop the tools, and become an editor, aiming their barrels and protecting their ammunition.
A painful transition.
Very. We walked through the glass walls of the panopticon, embracing the brutal reality of radical transparency to defeat the principal agent problem. We navigated the crucible of the unseen audience, learning that formal rules are the only way to save organic culture. And finally, we saw how writing down the laws and forcing engineers to talk to customers allows a company to maintain its soul while institutionalizing its momentum. It is a staggering transformation.
It is. And I want to leave the listener with a final paradigm shift, something that sits just outside the text of these specific lectures, but is deeply implied by the entire arc we've discussed.
Lay it on us.
Throughout this deep dive, we've looked at this entirely through the lens of the founder. We've talked about how founders exert their power to shape the employees, edit their behavior, and mold them to fit the mission. But I want you to consider the inverse. As a startup scales to 5,000 or 10,000 people, it absorbs the willpower, the ethics, the anxieties, and the diverse backgrounds of thousands of brilliant minds.
That's a lot of collective energy.
Exactly. At a certain point, the power dynamic flips. The collective weight of the employees begins to shape the founder. A 22-year-old kid in a hoodie doesn't just manage a 10,000-person company. The company forces that kid to evolve into a 40-year-old CEO. The ultimate reality of scaling a team is that you don't just build a company. If you are successful, the company ultimately rebuilds you.
That is an incredible thought to end on. You start out dictating the rules to the machine, and eventually the machine dictates the reality back to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these frameworks, the barrels and ammunition, the editor's red pen, the unseen audience, and look closely at your own workspace tomorrow. Look at the lines of communication. Look at what gets rewarded. You might just start to see the hidden physics of your own team. Until next time, keep building.